Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. It's a good thing podcasts are free, as this one isn't worth a penny. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leaks.
Now, Damien, before we get on with this week's podcast, you had something quickly to say about our sponsors.
Yeah, we've got a new sponsor, Money Farm, and Money Farm are an online investment advisor and one of the biggest digital wealth management companies in Europe. So a big thank you to them for sponsoring the podcast. Now, Money Farm create portfolios to maximise long-term returns using ETFs to make incredibly cheap portfolios. And you even get the first £10,000 of your portfolio invested without any charge from Money Farm. And if you enter the code MTTM20K into the box when you sign up, you get the first £20,000 of your portfolio invested and run by moneyfarm.com without any charge.
Great stuff. On with this week's show. Hello and welcome to episode 121 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, third take, how are we doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Andy. Anybody who's wondering why Andy said third take is I forgot to start recording, and then Andy also then started laughing and got it wrong. So, as professional as ever, it's good. I think we actually had a week off, didn't we, on the podcast? Lots of people out there will be recovering from a week of missed podcasts because actually it was half term, so I think we're probably just a little bit out of practice even after 121 episodes. So yeah, we had a week off. That was accidental. That was my fault actually. And for once... Well,
now I have to take part of the blame as well because I didn't have the ability to communicate with you because my phone was broken, but that's a different story.
And for me, it was half term and I decided to have a few days off and everything got piled up and I had a few days off. I went to Windsor Castle actually. So that was quite good fun with the kids.
Didn't you go to Windsor Castle? Didn't you see... I'm sure you were walking around some castle grounds when you saw some footballers.
Well remembered, Andy. That's the first thing I said when I went there. I saw Andy Carroll, didn't I, and Mark Noble, who played for West Ham.
That's right.
Giving a tour, an exclusive tour around the castle. So, nothing as exciting this time, if you can call Andy Carroll exciting. It was much more... it was quieter, but it was good fun. I loved it. It was great to spend a day or two with the sort of family, not doing money stuff, which, as much as I love it, you do need a break, otherwise you burn out.
No, absolutely. Well, I've had a fairly non-eventful week. As I mentioned briefly there, my phone broke on me. I can't believe how dependent on a phone I am. Basically, the reason I didn't get back to you for a full day is because I was in Covent Garden in the Apple shop. They were fixing my phone.
For a full day?
Well, I had to book myself in and it took 6 hours to get an appointment. It's called the phone surgery.
Do you know what, Andy? That just sounded like the dog ate my homework excuse at school. The reason I couldn't record the podcast, sir, was because I was stuck in the Apple shop for 24 hours. I couldn't communicate.
It was horrendous. I mean, I use my phone to tell the time. I use it as a calculator. I work as a day job doing accounts, so that is my main calculator that I use for work. I couldn't tell the time. I couldn't communicate with anyone. Every time I went to do something, it was to do it on the phone, and then it was just completely dead. So it was a full factory reset. So
not a full factory.
Quite scary.
Yeah, well, full factory resets are always a worry, aren't they?
Luckily, I back up all my photos and videos on an external sort of device. So luckily, they were all saved. But I've lost quite a lot of numbers and quite a lot of memories. Really, never mind.
All right. See, there's our first tip of the week. Make sure you back up your storage. I do that actually, because my brother is a bit of a techie and he told me about doing that because somebody he knew, the same thing happened, phone died and all that stuff disappeared. And you can get some good services like Dropbox. They do one where you can pay a subscription, it's not much, and it will just automatically, every time you take a photo on your phone, it will automatically upload it into Dropbox. So you don't have to do anything, and it will just do it. So, okay, if you're taking loads of pictures and you wanted to choose the best one, you're going to probably take pictures of all sorts of things that just be uploaded, screenshots and stuff. But it's worth it because you don't have to worry about what you just said. And although it's not a money-saving tip, because it costs you probably about £10 a month, it is one of those things that is a bit of a lifesaver when it comes to saving those photos. But anyway, that's an inadvertent tip at the very start of the podcast that is kind of money related, but something I use. And just on that, I'll tell you what's on the show this week, and it feeds vaguely nicely to one of the pieces, that something I did this week along those lines. I returned the favour, as it were, to my brother and saved him quite a lot of money on something that I do and I've done in the past to help him. And it's related to sewers, so that is a very probably strange link. As also, I'm doing a piece on it's to do with market timing, but not. I mean, we talked about market timing before, where people are investing and they try and go in at the right time to make the most money and get out before it all crashes. And well, you know what that is. There are people who end up being accidental market timers. So I'm going to tell you more about that, and you can see if you're an accidental market timer. So you're not trying to do it, but you are. And I get a lot of emails from people all the time, which is fantastic. So do keep sending them in. Do keep writing to us on social media as well. And one of the pieces this week is an email I got from somebody who is worried that they have been scammed out of £100,000 of their life savings. So listen to that, because I'm going to go through the sort of brief story and what my response to them was. And they asked that I share it on the podcast because they listen to the podcast. So it's an interesting one, if not a concerning and worrying, but it is unfortunately not unusual.
Good. Okay. What should we start with?
Let's start with the sewer one, because I tell you this story. It seems vaguely, people will think, what has this got to do with money? But it does. I went round to my brother's house and recently, and he said to me, if you're eating your breakfast, you might want to sort of pause this and or skip forward a little bit. But he went round his house and he said to me, do you know what? I think my downstairs toilet isn't flushing quite right. I flush it and it seems to fill up slightly and take a while to go away. And he said, look, I want to go into the garden and lift up the drain cover to see what's under there and see it's not blocked or anything. And if you imagine where, like many people, live in terraced houses, okay, so he lives in a terraced house at the end of a street. So the sewers are all linked. So the neighbours, when they flush their toilets or their water goes into that main drain, it goes down, it runs along all the properties. And as he's on the end, it's like the junction at the point, but it's under his patio. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll help you lift the cover off because it's really heavy. And we lifted the cover off, and what I can only describe was something like one of the old horror films of the Blob. But that blob was made, obviously, of things that humans produce. And that was just incredible. So immediately that was what was going on. All the stuff that people have been putting down the toilets. Because this is one of the things that they, wherever you are in the country, your water board has probably been placing adverts about not putting wet wipes, baby wipes.
Yeah, I've heard that the biggest problem is wet wipes, or one of the biggest problems. People just need educating that they're not flushable, you know. And
the thing is, the companies say that they advertise them now and actually market them as flushable wipes.
Really?
Yeah, and they say, because I remember we had some for a few years ago when my first daughter was born. You're thinking, this is brilliant, so you can actually flush these ones down the toilet. But the water companies are saying you can't. Even if they say they are flushable, they are not, because they don't disintegrate quickly enough. So, if anything, there's your first tip. Don't flush those things down the loo, because you're going to end up causing yourself a problem and probably have to pay to have it unblocked. So, anyway, here he is faced with God knows how long it's been there for his entire street now, about to erupt into his garden. So, he therefore needs to clear this drain. And so he goes, well, I'm going to have to ring up Dino Rod or whatever and try and get someone to come out and clear the drains. And I said to him, you do realise, don't you, that you don't have to pay for that? And he said no. And so this is the story, the tip in this, is that many moons ago, I moved into my house, which is not far from his, and it's a terraced house. And like a lot of terraced houses, it was built before 1937. Now, that's a key date for this story, because in my house, the similar thing happened, and the sewers that run, or the pipes that run through the gardens, got blocked, and then actually sewage was starting to spill onto people's gardens. So I had someone come round who was going to unblock it for me, and the guy, well, he worked for Dino Rod at the time, and he said to me, he looked at the job, and I think he was one of these guys who thought this is going to be an expensive, big job, where it's going to take him all day. He wasn't sure he wanted to do it. And he said to me, when was your house built? And I said, actually, it was built in 1891. It's a terraced house, nothing fancy, just a terraced house. And he said, did you know that actually, if your house was built before 1937, that the water board is legally responsible for all the sewers that run on your property, because the rules are that if there's a sewage system that runs along your property, even from one that's shared, then it's the responsibility of the person whose land it runs under. But if your house was built before 1937 as a result of something called the Public Health Act 1936, you don't have to pay for it, and the water board have to come and clear it free of charge. So he said, look, I could charge you 500 quid for this, or you could just ring them up and they'll come and do it for free. And that's exactly what happened. So, cut the long story short, I told my brother this and he did it. Because if you ring up the water board, they don't always tell you this. And it's not...
No, of course they don't. It's not in their interest, really.
No, and if you Google it, it's very hard to find the rule unless you know what it's called. So the Public Health Act 1936. And so the rule is that anything after that period, you're deemed responsible for if the pipe or sewage system is going from your property and across your land. But in that instance, anybody upstream, as it were, is responsible to pay for the blockage to be cleared as well, to share the cost. But of course, in my instance, because my house was built before that period, none of us had to pay anything. They had to do it for free. And there are so many people that actually impacts around the country where they could get it for free. But when you move into your house, no one tells you that. And I've sort of, over the years, told each of my neighbours when they have suddenly got somebody round, and I'm like, do you know you don't have to pay for that? Or they try to do it themselves because they didn't want to pay out to get somebody to do it. And so you do realise. So today's tip is one of those ones that came to me inadvertently by somebody who was going to charge me money doing me a favour and couldn't be bothered to do the job, quite frankly. And I saved him probably about somewhere between saved my brother, I should say, between £300 and £500. So if your house was built before then, you've lucked out. So that means you don't have to buy all those insurances. Because this is what's odd. The local water board keeps sending me letters to buy cover. So if my sewers get blocked or external pipes and all this sort of stuff. But they are responsible for that. And they're trying to sell me cover.
It's so dodgy because I know the letters you're talking about. And on those letters, they specifically say, did you know that you are responsible for the pipes that lead from your house to the main... And actually, from exactly what you're saying, because your house is pre-1937, you're absolutely not responsible. So they're kind of lying to you in the literature that they're sending you, which is a bit irresponsible.
Well, I think that because they must be able to check something in terms of land registry or something. I know it's not their bag, but they wouldn't. If I rang them up, I should do it as a mystery shop actually, and see what happens if I ring them up, whether they screen me out, as it were. But that's the first tip today. It's about sewage, but it will save you a small fortune if your house is obviously of a certain age.
Great. And those people who fast forwarded because they're having their breakfast, welcome back. We've stopped talking about poo.
Welcome back.
What have we got next?
Right. Do you know what? I'm going to do the investment one, the one that was related to seeming scam. And I say that it hasn't been proven to be a scam. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to read the email I was sent. And I'm obviously not going to mention the person's name because it's I wouldn't do that. It's going to be anonymous. Now, the email I got, it starts with, hi Damien, I wonder if you could help me. Basically, I need guidance as to what to do. In brief, I've got myself into a difficult situation. 9 months ago, I decided to invest in a scheme that offered 14% return and no risk to capital. And then they put in brackets, too good to be true, ? Checked out the website, called and spoke to the director, looked at company's house information, so that's where details of the company is stored legally, and you can see stuff about the company who owns it, and you can even start to see things about their accounts. And he met the director on 2 different occasions to discuss the project, which involved arbitrage, buying and selling of gold from mine to refinery. I invested £100,000 in the scheme, pretty much half my savings at the time, and it was either this scheme or your 80-20 investor plan I was considering, and I'd been getting very low returns from my financial advisor. And after investing, I received a bond detailing the loan to be repaid after 2 years and paying interest of 14% in 3 monthly instalments. All this detail is important, by the way. This is why I'm reading it out. All appeared to be going okay with regular contact. First payment was made after 4 months, bit of a delay due to setting up a bank transfer, but I've received nothing since then. And now the second payment, due last December, has not arrived. And for people listening to this in the future, we are now 2 months down the line from that date. I still get assurances that everything's okay, but usually my increasingly anxious calls and emails are unreturned. What action do you suggest I take? I do not want to escalate the situation by overreacting if it's just an admin problem or missed deadlines, but I am at a loss as to what to do. Maybe this is not your remit, but I'd appreciate your thoughts or a steer of what to do. Now, I mean, I received that email this week, and I was just... It's one of those things
Your
that
heart
makes...
sunk.
It did. I'm not going to lie, because it's one of those things that makes you angry, because there's a lot of this that goes on out there. Now, I'll run through my response. I won't read it word for word, but I'll tell you basically what it said. And the first thing I did was to point out that if you're in this situation out there and you've got a similar thing going on, then get in touch, because we'd like to hear. And it's only when people start speaking out that they find that these scams ever get uncovered. And the first thing I said to the chap was, look, first thing is you don't know you've been scammed yet, so let's not panic or anything like that. So the first thing I pointed out was that, well, he's right to be concerned and actually should be quite annoyed about what's gone on. At this point in time, I don't know enough information about the company or anything like that, or to say whether it's genuine or not. But he's obviously signed up to some form of contract where they've agreed to set terms and conditions and payments, which he's not received. So as soon as he's not received them, they're in breach of those terms and conditions. And I think sometimes it can feel like when something like this happens, you almost don't want to poke the sort of wasp's nest or bee's nest, as it were, because you don't want to. You're worried that something's going to go wrong. You basically, in your heart, know this isn't quite right. And I said to him, look, looking at it from the information you've given me, you've been promised a no risk to capital investment, which usually is too good to be true, with a substantial guaranteed return. And they're using a sort of a very complex, esoteric investment. So this arbitraging of gold and to refinery, I can only imagine what that actually is. And he got some initial payments up front, so everything seems okay. And then nothing. And now all his contact and comms are proving futile, or his attempts to contact them. Now, as I said to him, I don't know that this is anything wrong, but it has the hallmarks of an investment scam, because you can meet the people, it can be very convincing, and then ultimately they take your money, things go along quite nicely for a while, then they shut up shop. And like I said to him, look, don't fret as such that you've been immediately scammed. You need to find out whether it is an admin error, as he says. But it's worth talking about this on the podcast, because those are the sort of hallmarks where people's alarm bells should be ringing. And it was very telling that he said he didn't want to rock the boat, essentially, and upset anything. And as I pointed out to him in the email, I said to him, look, things can't get any worse, technically, because they've taken £100,000 of your money and already defaulting, essentially, on payments. That's pretty much as bad as it can get for you. And as long as you don't send them any more money, whatever you do. Now, the first thing to also to point out is that being a victim of something like this, it might not be a scam, as I said, or just something where it's not going quite according to plan, where people seem to be negating on their responsibilities or whatever. So we've all had that, where companies aren't playing ball as such. That you have to realise that you don't want to feel stupid about it or make people feel bad. This happens to lots of people. There are companies that fall foul of this sort of stuff. These people are very, very good. You can sometimes do all the checks you want on somebody, and they will know what the sort of checks you're going to do, and they will make sure that they're going to seemingly pass them. Come on, most scammers are probably the greatest charmers you'll ever meet. So what I've said to him is the further advice was don't overreact, because technically you don't know if it's a scam or not. But what I would do is straight away start contacting them to almost harass them, and go to the point where you will almost turn up, or do turn up on their offices to find out what's going on, because they can't get annoyed with you. They're in breach of their obligations. Then, if you do get somewhere with the company, then it seems to be they are genuine and they're actually not just giving you the money. They're being pretty sort of slapdash. They make a formal complaint. And if they are legitimate and regulated by the FCA, then they've got time frames they have to respond in. As you know, Andy, you work in financial services. Once you make a formal complaint in writing, it then kicks a whole process that they have to apply in a certain period of time, so they're not in breach of their obligations.
Yeah.
And then if you are not happy with the response that you've got, you can then refer it to the financial ombudsman, but you have to give the company a chance to rectify or respond to a complaint you make before you go to the ombudsman. So if they are a genuine company and it just seems they're having cash flow issues, then you need to check out the level of protection you've got under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, if any. And failing that, how is the money ring-fenced within their operation? Because normally what should happen is your money should be ring-fenced in some way. So if a company goes bust, then your money is invested somewhere, and that investment still exists, and technically some other administrator can take that over, and then you can still get your money back at some point.
Yeah.
And so, but if after all of that it looks like it is something that's fraudulent, then you should report it to Action Fraud. And now Action Fraud, they look into all this sort of stuff about scams. And if you go onto the FCA website, so if you Google FCA, we'll put a link up below the podcast, but FCA and scams, they've got a website called scamsmart.fca.org.uk, and they list on there some of the latest scams that are going on that they're aware of, and also what you can do and what your next action point should do. So it's one of those things that it makes you angry, because receiving emails like this, because somebody, if they're not being scammed, they're actually being treated badly, but they could be being scammed. So the other quick point I made suggested to the guy was to go online and Google the hell out of this company and any mentions, because what will tend to happen is, if there are victims who are starting to look around, you probably aren't the only victim to any fraud. There will be other people starting to talk online, and then you can meet up and compare experiences, and by that sort of information sharing, you can probably get to the bottom of what's really going on, or get a little bit more information. So that would be one of the early steps to do as well. So the whole point of this piece is for anybody out there, if you're concerned, the best thing to do is not bury your head in the sand and start kicking up a fuss and start taking action, because you should never feel stupid for being the victim of any scam, or even if it's not a scam, just a company that's not treating you correctly or fairly, because it happens to so many people, a lot of people. You get very astute, rich people. You've had banks that have been victims of this sort of stuff. I mean, let's be honest, there's so much fraud that's going on within the system. I just think that it was very important when I gave him the message back, was not to make him feel in any way responsible or stupid for what happened, which is, I think, the natural reaction. People turn around and go, well, I would never have done that. Well, in hindsight...
Yeah, in hindsight, absolutely. I really feel for the guy. I know he's a listener of the podcast, and I want to almost pass on my sort of best wishes to him, because I know that feeling, that deep... I haven't lost anywhere near that sort of money, but I've made some bad calls in life and put money in the wrong place, and it makes you feel just ill, and you rack yourself with guilt, and you find yourself going over again and again in your head, in hindsight, I wouldn't have done this, and what was I thinking? So I bet he's going through all of those emotions, and I just want to sort of put it out there that I feel for you, and like I say, hopefully other listeners will learn as a result of what you've discussed now.
And also, Andy, he said he's going to keep me in the loop, and I've got a bit more information about what's happened, and going forward, then we could perhaps pick up what the ultimate end to this story was, and if it's a positive in terms of that he ends up getting some of his money back and etc., and it actually ends up being just a bit of mismanagement rather than anything darker, then that's also something positive for people who come across something very similar that isn't always the negative. But equally, if it ends up being something slightly, obviously, worst case scenario, then what the lessons are from that. So, I mean, thanks for getting in touch with the story. It just shows you that there are people out there. This stuff is very real. You see stuff on the news, but it's very real, and it happens to everybody, including, well, our listeners too.
Good. Okay. What do we got next? Something more upbeat, hopefully.
The accidental market timer, Andy. This is something that I have been pondering of late, because we've done bits about market timing, and we've had some great movements in stock markets, haven't we? Recently, we've had Brexit, we've had Donald Trump winning elections, and we've had some quite seismic moves in stock markets and bond markets, for that matter. So there's been ample opportunity for people to think they could market time, because they look at these scenarios and think, God, do you know what? The market's rocketed in a very short space of time. If I'd got in there and got out the top, then I'd have made a killing. So market timing is one of those things that starts becoming quite prevalent, and people start trying to time the market, because at the moment, as this podcast is going out, we keep hitting all-time highs in the stock market, and that's here, but mainly in the US. And there's a world index of stock markets that also run by the FTSE that's hit an all-time high. So it's not just a US thing, it's a general global trend. Now, we talked on the podcast before about trying not to market time. So that means trying to predict what the market's going to do. So at the moment it's high, maybe I'll cash out, or try and time it, it's about to take off. And in the long run, to be a successful investor, you need to buy low, sell high. That is fundamentally what you need to do. And that's always funny when I say that, actually, Andy. I can see you smile on your face, because I have to make my brain think really hard. I don't say it round the wrong way.
Are we really going to put a podcast out there saying, hey guys, if you want to invest, you need to buy low, sell high? I mean, really?
Well, well, it's simple, isn't it, Andy? But it's hard to do. But
yeah, true.
But what tends to happen in reality is that there's some great research has been done, and it looks at why retail investors' returns don't seem to stack up against some of the professional investors' returns. So the fund managers, if they run their own money, why don't they do as well? And there was evidence to show that there is actually a gap. So people who run their own money do worse. So there's been some great research that shows out there that DIY armchair investors actually underperform their professional counterparts. Now, why is that? Part of it is the information they have, but another part is because of their tendency to do the opposite of what we just laughed about. They tend to buy in high and they tend to sell low. So when the market is really exciting and they see the headlines that the FTSE's up and hitting record highs, or the US stock market is, they'll enter at that point because they don't want to miss out. It's human nature. We all feel it. And you start buying in. Oh yeah, look, this market's only going one way. Of course, then it crashes and they panic. And they think, oh my God, I don't lose all my money, so they sell out. And what actually happens then is that they are just capturing the downside all the time. And that tendency is why they over the long run have underperformed. But you need to sort of screen that out of what you do, which means you need to buy and hold for the long term. And we touched upon it before, but it's worth me mentioning again, is that the best days in the stock market, if you look at the best 20 days in the stock market over the sort of decades, if you miss those days, then it impacts your returns massively. So to give you an example, if you'd invested in the FTSE All-Share over the past 20 years and you'd stayed in the market ups and downs, then you'd be up 250%. But if you'd missed the best 20 days, that's only 20 days, you would be up about 25%. It's a huge difference.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is massive.
Yeah, and then if you'd missed the best 30 days, and we're talking over 20 years here, then you'd actually be down. You'd be negative. And so,
Goodness.
and what the point is you might say, oh, well, you don't know when they're going to happen. Well, you don't. But I did some research for 80/20 Investor previously, and to get a free 30-day trial and have a look at it. And I did some research on what you should do in falling markets. And one of the things that came out of it was that the best days follow the worst days in stock markets very quickly. And I worked out on average what that time scale is. I'm not going to give it away on the podcast, but it's very short. It's typically less than a month. So that's all I'll say. So if you jump ship at the worst point, you're going to miss the best bits as well, because it tends to be at some point a bit of a rebound. But anyway, so trying to market time is going to have a bad effect on your performance. But there are people who do it inadvertently. Now, there's been a massive surge in passive investing, so that means buying index trackers and things like that. And I'm, as you know, I'm an advocate of both. I like index trackers. I like active funds. So active ones are run by people, fund managers, whereas active ones are run by computers. And I think you can have a mix of both that works well. 80/20 Investor is all about that. You just invest in what's working. But passive funds do have a danger that they can end up making you an accidental market timer. Because, for example, active funds tend to have about 3 to 5% in cash in their fund, whereas passive ones tend to have anything, because they're actually just buying the market, which is an index. So if you moved from an active fund to a passive one, you suddenly are investing a whole load of more money into the market, like potentially at the top. And if you multiply that over all the investors who are doing that, so the billions of pounds that are slowly moving from active funds to passive ones, it's adding billions to an already inflated stock market, if that makes sense, because it's just it's being done automatically as they move across, which is actually compounding the problem of an overinflated stock market, which makes it increasingly more likely that the market will crash. So what you've done is you've actually timed the market by encouraging it to go up higher. You've put more money in at the top, and it might crash. So you're kind of could be. I'm not saying it will set yourself up for a bit of a fall there when people do that en masse. But also some of the index trackers out there will be weighted based on market caps as well. So that means that you've got a bigger share of a market. So let's say there's a company, might be Apple, has a disproportionate amount of the index because it's done on about the size of the company, essentially, the total value of all their shares. And if they are very dominant, they'll be very dominant in your portfolio. And the problem is you then invest in a tracker that might actually give you too much exposure, therefore, to a company that could be overvalued and just about to crash. You don't know that, but you're buying things when they're really buying at the top, if that makes sense, because you're buying things. Yeah. If companies are successful and their market cap keeps growing, they'll form a bigger and bigger part of an index that you buy into. And so you're buying actually the more expensive stuff, the stuff that's already very inflated. So you're kind of timing by going in at their peak, and so therefore there's a potential you could go it could crash and you sell out low. It's just an interesting dynamic of what passive investing is, because people think that it's the dream solution. But the other thing is that people who passively invest also watch TV, and therefore they have more clarity over their investments, because they might track the FTSE 100 and they'll see on the news the FTSE 100 is going up, and therefore they have a direct comparison. They'll jump in, so they'll start making decisions based on news feeds that they've got. So some news that they see on TV. If you're investing in an active fund, because the manager is buying things that are not necessarily in proportion to a given index, or they might buy companies because they think they've got value, you're not sure 100% where your money is, if that makes sense. So you're not going to, the FTSE's going up, you're not probably going to make a decision to change because you think it's actually inbuilt into what that manager is doing. So you're less likely to be swayed about buying in high and therefore selling low when the market panics and it crashes than when you're in an active fund. Potentially, I'm not saying that's always the case. But there's one other group where there's an interesting dynamic. I'm just writing, I'm about to finish writing a piece for 80/20 Investors about ethical investing. And ethical investing is whereby you invest in funds that are supposedly meant to be more morally upstanding than a typical fund. So a good example is that an ethical fund won't invest in tobacco companies, because tobacco companies make money out of getting people addicted to nicotine and essentially giving them cancer. And in the emerging markets, they've gone over there and they're, I suppose, exploiting people to a certain extent, because there might be a lack of education over there about the downside of cigarettes, where unlike the West. So there is definite ethics in there that lots of people question. And another one is people who might manufacture, companies that manufacture weapons. And I mean, tobacco firms are quite a big constituent of some funds, and that's not untypical at all. And so ethical funds won't invest in those sectors. And so somebody asked me the question of whether investing in ethical funds was actually a good idea or not. Does it hit your performance of your portfolio so much that it actually makes it?
I like this juxtaposition of, I want to be ethical, but if it's not going to make me any money, I'm quite happy to concede on the ethical part.
Yeah.
You're either ethical or do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But Andy, you just hit the nail on the head, because the whole research piece looks into the answering that question. But one of the things that, small part that came out, that what you said, if you are truly, truly, truly ethical, what you should do is you would invest in a company that was ethical by your screening or whatever it was, or fund manager should. And then as soon as the company does something that is not ethical, so it's an unethical thing that maybe hits the news, their share price will tank. It will fall. So it could be something like an oil company that has a disaster, or a bank, for example, that gets done for laundering money, which has happened.
Yeah.
And their share price will plummet. Now, if you were truly, truly ethical and stuck by your ethics, then what you should do is sell immediately, because you don't want to be invested in that company. But what will happen is, you were holding a company while the valuations were high, where everybody loved it, then immediately on the bad news you will sell, and you will inevitably sell at your lowest, it's probably its lowest point, before it recovers and the bad news goes away, which inevitably does tend to happen. So ethical investors are the accidental market timers if they are true to their ethics, which I think is an interesting thing I've never heard anybody actually pull up, but when you look at it, they should be. So I just want to touch upon one other thing to do with that ethical point. It's just an idea. If you're ethical and you want to ethically invest, I applaud that, and I wholeheartedly back you to do what you want with your money. It's very difficult because funds they won't, let's say, Andy, you had a particular thing that you stood for, you didn't like oil companies or something because they're wrecking the Arctic or whatever. A fund manager, you invest in a fund that they just have a loose sort of mandate that says they will invest ethically. If that manager starts investing in those companies, he won't tell you, because it's just a general investment mandate. He has all the millions of people investing in his fund. Do you mean they're not the guardians of your morals? They're guardians of the fund's morals. So you never actually get a match. And I want to throw this out there, and people may shoot me down for saying this, but there's an idea that you could say, if you invest and you want to be so ethically minded, why would you not invest your money as you see fit to make the maximum returns, and then some of your profits you donate to charities that really matter to you? And that is, I mean, two wrongs don't make a right. I'm not saying that, but if you could make a difference to your local community, or you could make a difference to a school or something like that. Because there was, again, another piece of great research I saw this week was talking about how money that enters the city, so that's via you and your pensions and your funds and etc. that you invest in, tends to never leave it, and it tends to stay in there, and people just take slices of it. So a fund manager takes a slice, a platform will take a slice, everyone's taking slices, and the money never leaves that bubble and never really makes it out into the economy to make a difference. Yes, you might buy them a nice boat and the fund managers a nice holiday and all that sort of stuff, but you're not making a difference because the financial services operates in a very almost a bubble, as it were, and that money just seems to wash around in that bubble and never emerges to make a difference to the schools down your road and that kind of thing. So I'm throwing it out there because if you wanted to, you could, if your ethics were really key to you, you could try to be ethical with your investing, but you could actually, the profits of it, do something that's far greater. And I wish companies were more like that. They did more with their profits to support charities and other things. But that's it, Andy. Sorry, I almost got into a little mini rant there, but ethics is ethics and investing are a very strange thing. It's almost like ethics and tax. I always ponder that. I mean, I can't stand the idea that companies don't pay the right amount of tax and try and exploit things. But there is also that question of, if the laws are there to be made to say what they can and can't do, then I blame the government for not making the laws tighter when they actually exploit them and go around the outside, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I just find that whole tax and morals is very interesting, because also income tax. People talk about you should pay more income tax. They say that rich people should and things like that. But you could, if you took it to the nth degree. I think that income tax was originally created to fund the Napoleonic War. So you could argue, if you really were to be a bit sort of pedantic, that the tax system was founded on paying for wars, and it still does to a certain extent now, because obviously it pays for defence and stuff like that. So maybe it's unethical to pay tax, but it's also unethical to avoid it. So it's all just a minefield, I think, when it comes to ethics and money.
It is. It's given me a headache. I think I'm going to move away into the woods somewhere and just build myself a shack and live off the land. Right, Damien, we're done.
Yeah, that's it for this week, Andy. We won't miss a week again. Our wrists have been slapped, and we're back on it again, aren't we, Andy?
We are, yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get in touch, please do so. Damien at moneytothemasses.com. You can get in touch on the podcast address too. It's podcast at moneytothemasses.com. Damien's got a Twitter account, of course. That's possibly one of the best ways to get almost instant response from him, and that's at moneytothemasses, and use a number 2 instead of TO. And check out Instagram, Facebook. Damien's got lots of videos going up online and bits and pieces. It's all good stuff. Get involved, and it's free too.
It is free. I mean, the Twitter one, I do want to bang that home a bit. That people, if you want to ask things on Twitter, I always come back to those, because you tweet me, it pings in my pocket, and I think it's a great medium. It also makes people have to be concise, and yeah, it's great. Or even if you just want to say hello, just do it. Do it. Right, that's it for this week, Andy. I will see you next week. Bye.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.